Dear brothers and sisters, we begin by praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and bearing witness that none has the right to be worshipped or unconditionally obeyed except for Him. And we bear witness that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is His final messenger. We ask Allah to send His peace and blessings upon Him, the prophets and messengers that came before Him, His family and companions that served alongside Him, and those that follow in His blessed path until the day of judgment. And we ask Allah to make us amongst them. I want to frame this with something that Dr. Ha'anunus, may Allah bless her, when she had gone to Gaza, came back, and like many of the doctors, carried multiple gems of conversations. And she said that the only complaint, or the closest thing to a complaint that I heard, was we're tired. And subhanAllah, you can see that as time goes on. And this is part of the psychological warfare that's waged on a people, that we're tired. And that is a sentiment, that sentiment is something that may be the case for many of those who are trying to usher in positive change in the world. We're tired. And this is not actually just about how we look at the becomings of a world that we really did not anticipate living in, with normalized genocide and beyond. But it's more about how are we supposed to feel about everything right now, and how much does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually care about how we feel? How much does Islam speak to the idea of feelings? How much are you supposed to feel deflated? How are you supposed to be encouraged? What's the balance between optimism and pessimism? You know, like every pessimist will say, I'm not a pessimist, I'm just a realist. What's the balance between all of these things? And how much are these emotions to actually be catered to? And how do we deal with just being tired? I'm exhausted. And what does that mean in regards to our faith? And I frame it with a conversation that I'll come back to inshallah at the end of this. And it's the conversation with Imam Ahmed and a man, from some narrations say his son. So let's just imagine a father and a son sitting in prison. And the trials of Imam Ahmed have gone on for so long. He's been tortured from one ruler to another. One Khalifa tortures him in his own way, and then another Khalifa comes in and tortures him in another way. And it feels like it doesn't matter which party or which president at the time, which Khalifa is in charge, everyone just pulls him in and abuses him and oppresses him and tortures him. And there's a point to where, you know, you feel like you're starting to see hope, and then something happens again and you get pulled down. And so I want us all to kind of go to that sit down. And his son asks him the question, when do we actually rest? When do we actually find relief from all of this? And let's get back to the core question. How much does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala want us to feel better about our life circumstances, about our world circumstances, about our pursuit? Versus, how much does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala want us to respond to the call with a certain type of discipline? And I start off with this premise. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not ignore pain. Allah does not ignore our feelings. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in fact shows that He cares about our emotions. He cares about our feelings. He cares about the way that things land on the believers, even if He knows they are good for them. And so the pain is not the problem. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala honors the pain. Do not grieve. Don't lose heart. Don't feel fear, because you are indeed the victorious party so long as you remain upon belief. We know that what they say about you, it makes you sad. We understand the grief that you're feeling, O Prophet of Allah. Allah even says, thinking about this, the end of it. And you can miss it if you're reading through it fast, especially the last line of a hadith, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that I don't hesitate with anything that I do the way that I hesitate, taking the soul of a believer. Why is it? Because death is not good for the believer at the time that it is? No. He hates death, and I hate disappointing him. What a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He hates death, and I don't like to disappoint him. Even though Allah knows that's the appointed time, that is, you know, what every inevitable ending looks like for every single person. I care about how my believing servant feels about something that is inevitable. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually honors those feelings. He honors those emotions. He makes it a point, the Qur'an was not revealed upon you to cause you undue burden or distress. He tells the Prophet ﷺ to make things easy, not to make things hard. And he says, and give quiet tidings, don't deflate people. Very interesting hadith, subhanallah. Because if you read the hadith, the explanation of that prophetic narration, the first part of the hadith, make things easy, don't make things difficult, means in regards to the prescription of the actual rulings, the law, the rights. Allah wants for you ease. How does He want for you ease? He says it in the Qur'an. If you're sick, you don't have to fast. If you're on a journey, then you're excused. There are certain dispensations and concessions that are embedded within the law, so that it's not when you travel you can shorten your prayers. In fact, Allah likes that you shorten your prayers when you travel. Allah likes that you take His concessions the way that He likes that you take on the difficult commands. So the first line of the hadith is in regards to the law itself. The second line Give people glad tidings. Don't deflate them. Speaks more to the delivery and the way it's going to land, and how people should not be told things in a way that they're going to feel like salvation is impossible and Allah's mercy is inaccessible and that everything is done. They should not be made hopeless and fall into despair. So all of this is actually deeply evident through the Qur'an and through the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, that Allah does actually care how we feel, and Allah does care how His servants feel when they are undergoing difficulty, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has taken that into consideration with the revelation and with the legislation. But then there's a second layer to this. There's a problem when you approach religion, when you approach deen for dopamine, and you're not willing to engage in the discipline. When your dua becomes like a form of like mood regulation and how I make myself feel better with my dua and my supplications, my prayers become about how I deal with the situation, not actually changing the situation. How I deal with the situation, how I feel that Allah is going to make me feel a certain way. Even though you make du'as, you ask Allah to protect you from being paralyzed or incapacitated by anxiety or grief. But when dua solely becomes about that, when the Quran becomes about the inspirational quote to get you through the next day, and it becomes all about religion as therapy, and the religion of Allah is not therapy. There are therapeutic elements of the religion. There are therapeutic elements of this mission. There are things that are embedded with living with a life of purpose that allow you to face what are otherwise obstacles that are impossible to overcome. There are therapeutic elements, but the religion cannot become therapy. It can't become chasing dopamine. It can't become I want to feel better, and that's why I'm going to pray this prayer, and that's why I'm going to do this thing that I heard that if I do this that I'll feel better. Because sometimes Allah doesn't want you to feel better. He wants you to do better. Sometimes Allah wants you to be better. And that comes through the difficult prescriptions of sadness, of toil, of mission, of burden. It comes through those things, and you have to accept. And there is always this healthy medium of, I should feel a sense of deficiency. I should feel like I should be doing more. He said that the believer performs good deeds and the heart trembles, and there is a fear that maybe I need to do more for it to be accepted. And there is this sense of feeling charged to take the next step, whereas the sinner commits their sins and they feel completely safe from those sins, like they're fine, I'm okay in life, right? So the believer feels entrusted with something that's deeper, with something that's greater, that encompasses a certain sense of stress and burden to move you to another level of yourself for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah constantly makes it a point to say it was not to stress you out. It was not to hurt you. Allah takes no joy in causing you pain. Allah takes no joy in disappointing you. But there are necessary burdens that exist in this life to wean you off of it a bit. And subhanAllah is even thinking about the ayah. Verily with hardship comes ease. We share this ayah to comfort ourselves. We share this ayah to make ourselves steadfast. But look how quickly Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala qualifies it so that you don't become sedated by the verse. And so when you free up from something, whether it is getting out of a difficult moment or passing through this difficult trial, and the root of actually comes from fatigue. Exert yourself to Jannah. Why? Because you know what, dear brothers and sisters? If we free fill in our lifetimes, for example, we're going to have a lot more work to do. That's on like a very global level. When you come out of one test, if Allah brings you out of a test, the tax of your test is that you better now use your comfort to get somebody else out of their tests. Of the believer, that true rest is not here. And it's a simple truth that carries a major implication in our methodology of how we approach Allah. As the poet said, that you sought that major relief in your life, and you weren't able to find it until you realized that it is not found except on a bridge of tiredness. Paradise is not found except after you cross a bridge of tiredness, fatigue, exhaustion. It's the opposite of right. Jannah is when you get there, you rest. That's when relief is found. That's when relaxation is found. That's when you retire, is when you get to Jannah. And that's it. If Allah happens to be squeezing you as an individual level or squeezing us as an ummah to the greatest extent right now, the point is not for you to say, Ya Allah, let go of this for me so I can rest. The point is, Ya Allah, see me through this in a way that you will be pleased with me, in a way that will contribute to my ultimate relief, and in a way that will enable me to be there for somebody else. That's why I want raha. That's why I want rest. That's the relief that I seek. And subhanAllah, I think of that conversation of Ahmed and what he set for the standard, the bar that he set for his son. Like, I might die in prison and that's going to be okay because that's not where my ra is found. I might die here. You know, we have stories in Islamic history. I mean, look no further. Ahmed, i.e. manifies in prison, one dies out of prison. They're both two of the four imams, right? They make up half of the four imams. Incredible. But I look back at that and that rest and that relief, and you watch these people in Gaza and you can hear through the videos that drone over them, constantly buzzing over them, and then the bombs, and then the starvation, and then the news of someone else dying. 700 days of that. I don't know how a person functions, to be honest with you. And then you think of the moment that they breathe their last in quiet. Subhanallah. Like, think of in his last moments in this world, how tired he was. He had a spear through his body, and he was trying to get up and move forward and get up and move forward. He had a spear through his midsection, and he died like that. And the Prophet ﷺ sees him how? Relaxing on a couch in Jannah, like relaxation. What did the Prophet ﷺ mention? That the first night that the believer goes to the grave, after all the becomings of the grave, go to sleep. That's your nap time. Now go ahead and take a nap after the exhaustion of this journey. Take your first nap. Now there's relief, there's rest. This changes the way we approach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you're not tired, get tired. If you're not uncomfortable, get uncomfortable. Push yourself to that. That's actually part of the point. And victory is only meant to become the foundation of another victory, because this world will never be perfect for us as individuals, or be perfect for us in the collective sense or in the communal sense. The last thing, alhamdulillah, we have 3 people that are taking shahada that I already know of here today. Alhamdulillah. And I just left from giving another sister shahada. Alhamdulillah. And I know that at least one of those sisters that's with us today is one of those people that came to the protest for Gaza, and that became inspired to learn about Islam because of her protesting for Gaza, and then looked into the Qur'an and realized that it's the faith of the people of Gaza that sustains them in this exhausting journey, and is voluntarily coming to become a part of that journey as well. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless her and all of our sisters and brothers that have embraced Islam, that are embracing Islam, and may Allah allow us to maintain perspective, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not let our tiredness go to waste. You've been created in toil. Everyone gets tired in this world, but some people's tiredness goes to waste. May Allah let all of our be for His sake. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward all of it, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bring relief and make us a source of relief for our brothers and sisters, and allow us all to celebrate the ultimate relief that ultimate Muslims. So down below is a long-form khutbah style speech essay, inspired by the theme, Does Allah Want You to Feel Better? Written for a USA audience, grounded in Qur'an and authentic Islamic teachings, emotionally real, spiritually deep, no questions, no paragraph gaps, and continuous flow. Because of system limits, this is a condensed extended version, written in the same tone and structure you requested. If you want, I can continue and expand it further in the same exact style until it reaches full 8K words without changing tone or formats. Does Allah want you to feel better is not a motivational slogan. It is a divine reality rooted deeply in the Qur'an and in the lived experience of every believer who has turned back to Allah in moments of pain, confusion, weakness, and exhaustion. Islam does not present a distant God who watches human suffering without care. Rather, it introduces Allah as Al-Rahman Ar-Rahim, the one whose mercy surrounds everything, the one who knows the weight of every heart before a single word is spoken. In a world where people are taught to suppress pain, hide vulnerability, and chase happiness through consumption status and validation, Islam speaks to the human soul with honesty, compassion, and healing. Allah acknowledges sadness, grief, fear, and weakness, and He does not shame the believer for feeling broken. Rather, He draws near to the broken heart and promises closeness in moments of distress. The Quran repeatedly affirms that hardship is not abandonment, and struggle is not rejection, and pain is not proof of failure. Allah tells humanity that He created the human being weak, and He does not demand perfection. He asks for sincerity, effort, and return. When Allah addresses those who believe, He does so with gentleness and purpose, reminding them that ease is always paired with hardship, and relief is written into the fabric of struggle itself. This is not abstract theology. It is practical mercy designed to stabilize the human heart, especially in times when life feels overwhelming. In American society, many people carry silent burdens: anxiety, depression, loneliness, grief, identity confusion, and spiritual emptiness despite material comfort and outward success. Islam does not dismiss these struggles, it names them and treats them with compassion. The Quran speaks directly to emotional pain when Allah says that hearts find tranquility in His remembrance, and this tranquility is not temporary escape, but deep grounding peace. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, experienced loss rejection, betrayal, hunger, and grief. Yet Allah did not remove him from hardship. He strengthened him through meaning, purpose, and divine companionship. When the Prophet felt overwhelmed, Allah revealed words that lifted his heart, reminded him of his worth, and affirmed that difficulty was never the final chapter. This divine pattern continues for believers across time and place, including Muslims living in the United States, navigating faith, identity, social pressure, and personal trials. Allah does not ask believers to deny pain. He asks them to place pain in its proper context. Sorrow becomes meaningful when it is carried with awareness of Allah's wisdom. Tears are not weakness, and seeking comfort is not lack of faith. The Prophet himself wept openly and described tears as mercy placed in the hearts of servants. Islam does not demand numbness. It nurtures emotional honesty anchored in trust. Allah promises that He is closer to the believer than their own jugular vein, meaning no emotion is unseen and no struggle is unheard. When a person turns to Allah during distress, they are not burdening God, they are fulfilling the purpose of servitude, which is reliance and humility. The Qur'an consistently reframes suffering as a path to purification, elevation, and closeness. Allah tells believers that He will test them with fear, hunger, loss, and grief, but He also gives glad tidings to those who remain patient and anchored. Patience in Islam is not passive endurance, it is active resilience grounded in hope and trust. Allah never commands patience without promising reward, and He never allows a believer's pain to be wasted. Every tear, every sleepless night, every silent prayer becomes a source of elevation when carried with faith. This understanding transforms the believer's relationship with pain from resentment to meaning and from despair to resilience. Allah wants believers to feel better, not through denial of reality, but through clarity of purpose. Islam teaches that worldly life is not the final measure of success or happiness. True well-being is alignment with Allah even amid difficulty. The Quran reassures believers that Allah does not burden a soul beyond what it can bear, and this statement affirms divine justice and intimate knowledge of each individual's capacity. When life feels unbearable, it is not because Allah miscalculated, it is because the human heart has not yet seen the full picture. Allah's timing, wisdom, and plan extend beyond immediate perception, and trust in that plan is a source of relief. The concept of divine mercy in Islam is not conditional upon perfection. Allah repeatedly invites sinners, those who feel distant, those overwhelmed by regret, to return without shame. He declares that His mercy encompasses all things and that He forgives all sins for those who turn back sincerely. This message is especially powerful in a culture where people often define themselves by their worst moments or feel trapped by past mistakes. Islam liberates the believer from permanent guilt and offers renewal at every moment. Allah does not want His servants to drown in despair. He calls despair a misunderstanding of His nature. To despair of Allah's mercy is described as a loss of faith, not because pain is invalid, but because hopelessness denies the vastness of divine compassion. The Prophet taught that Allah descends in the final third of the night, calling out to those who seek forgiveness, relief, and mercy. This imagery communicates divine initiative and nearness. Allah seeks to heal hearts and invites them to speak honestly. Prayer in Islam is not ritual alone, it is conversation, solace, and grounding. When a believer places their forehead on the ground, they are not submitting to humiliation. They are aligning themselves with divine care. The act of sujood is where the heaviest burdens are released, because the believer acknowledges that control belongs to Allah, and relief comes from surrender, not resistance. Islam also recognizes the importance of community care, emotional support, and compassion among people. The Prophet described believers as one body where pain in one part affects the whole. Allah wants His servants to feel better through collective responsibility, kindness, empathy, and presence. Faith is not lived in isolation, and healing often comes through human connection guided by divine values. This is particularly important in modern societies where individualism can deepen loneliness. Islam counters this by emphasizing belonging, purpose, and mutual care. For those struggling silently with mental health challenges, Islam does not dismiss treatment, therapy, or support. Seeking help is not weakness, it is responsibility. The Prophet encouraged seeking treatment and recognized that Allah provides cures alongside illnesses. Spiritual reliance and practical steps work together in Islam. Allah wants believers to feel better holistically, emotionally, spiritually, and physically. Faith complements healing, it does not replace it with denial. The Quran reminds believers that worldly success and comfort are not signs of divine favor, nor are hardship and struggle signs of divine displeasure. Allah evaluates hearts' intentions and sincerity. A believer may be tested precisely because they are loved and because their soul is being refined. This reframing allows believers to navigate life with dignity, hope, and steadiness. Even when circumstances do not improve immediately, the believer's inner state becomes anchored in trust. Allah's desire for human well-being is evident in His names, attributes, and commands. He calls himself the most gentle, the most kind, the source of peace. He commands justice, mercy, forgiveness, and compassion because these values reflect his nature and promote human flourishing. When believers align with these values, they experience inner harmony. Islam is not a religion of constant fear. It is a religion of balance, accountability, and hope. Fear exists to prevent harm. Hope exists to sustain the soul, and love exists to draw the believer closer to Allah, in the end feeling better. In Islam does not always mean life becomes easier. It means the heart becomes stronger, clearer, and more trusting. Allah offers a peace that coexists with struggle and a joy that survives loss. This peace is not loud or flashy. It is steady, grounding, and resilient. It allows the believer to face uncertainty with courage and pain with dignity. Allah does not promise a life without hardship. He promises companionship, meaning, and eventual relief. This promise is enough to carry the believer through the darkest nights with faith intact and heart alive. Allah's mercy continues to unfold in the life of the believer in ways that are often subtle, yet profoundly transformative. Feeling better in Islam is not dependent on circumstances aligning perfectly, but on the heart learning where to rest. Allah teaches the believer to anchor their sense of worth not in productivity, popularity, or approval, but in servitude. When a person knows that their value comes from being a servant of Allah, their failures do not crush them, and their successes do not intoxicate them. This balance protects the heart from extremes and creates emotional stability. In a society that constantly measures people by outcomes, Islam reminds the believer that effort, intention, and sincerity are what matter most to Allah. This understanding relieves immense pressure and allows the soul to breathe. Allah comforts His servants by reminding them that nothing they endure is random. Every hardship has meaning, even when that meaning is not immediately visible. The Qur'an repeatedly narrates stories of prophets and righteous people who faced immense difficulty before relief arrived. These stories are not historical entertainment, they are emotional guidance. They teach the believer that delay does not equal denial and silence does not equal abandonment. When Allah delayed victory for the prophets, He was not neglecting them, He was preparing them and those around them for a greater outcome. This divine wisdom is meant to calm the anxious heart and remind it that timing belongs to Allah alone. For the believer living in the modern world, especially in the United States, where speed, productivity, and instant gratification dominate, Allah's rhythm is radically different. Allah invites the believer to slow down, to reflect, and to reconnect. Acts of worship in Islam are intentionally structured to interrupt chaos and ground the soul. The 5 daily prayers are not burdens, they are checkpoints of mercy designed to realign the heart throughout the day. Each prayer is a reset, an opportunity to release stress, recalibrate intention, and remember that Allah is in control. This consistent return to Allah throughout the day stabilizes emotions and nurtures resilience. Allah also addresses the inner critic that destroys peace. The Qur'an warns against despair, self-loathing, and hopelessness because these states distort the believer's perception of Allah. Shaitan exploits emotional vulnerability by whispering that one is unworthy, unforgivable, or forgotten. Allah counters these whispers by affirming that He is near, responsive, and merciful. He reminds believers that He loves those who repent and those who strive even when they fall short. This reassurance heals the shame that many carry silently and restores dignity to the believer's relationship with Allah. Feeling better in Islam also involves gratitude, not as denial of pain, but as recognition of ongoing blessings. Allah teaches believers to notice mercy even in hardship. Gratitude shifts focus from what is missing to what remains, and this shift strengthens emotional endurance. The Prophet taught that the believer's situation is always good, because ease leads to gratitude and hardship leads to patience, both of which are rewarded. This mindset transforms adversity into opportunity for growth and nearness to Allah. Allah also wants believers to feel better by cultivating forgiveness. Holding on to resentment, anger, and bitterness poisons the heart and prolongs suffering. The Qur'an encourages forgiveness not to excuse harm, but to liberate the soul from carrying unnecessary weight. Allah promises immense reward for those who restrain anger and pardon others. This act of releasing bitterness brings emotional relief and aligns the heart with divine compassion. Another essential aspect of feeling better in Islam is hope in the hereafter. Allah reminds believers that worldly pain is temporary and that ultimate justice, peace, and joy await beyond this life. This perspective does not diminish present struggles, it contextualizes them. When a believer remembers that this world is not the final destination, losses become bearable and endurance becomes purposeful. The promise of Jannah, where no pain, grief, or fear exists, gives strength to persist with dignity and faith. Allah also addresses loneliness by reminding believers that He is sufficient. Even when human support is absent, Allah remains present, attentive, and caring. Many believers experience moments when they feel unseen, misunderstood, or isolated. Islam teaches that Allah hears every whisper and knows every unspoken ache. This awareness fosters a deep, intimate relationship with Allah that sustains the believer during solitude. In Islam, feeling better also involves moral clarity. Confusion, anxiety, and restlessness often stem from living misaligned with one's values. Allah provides guidance not to restrict joy, but to protect the soul. When a believer aligns actions with divine guidance, inner conflict decreases and peace increases. Obedience in Islam is not blind submission. It is conscious trust that Allah knows what nurtures the human heart. Allah's care extends even to moments when faith feels weak. He does not abandon the believer for doubt, fatigue, or struggle. The Qur'an addresses believers in all states and reassures them that Allah's door remains open. Returning to Allah does not require perfection, it requires honesty. This openness invites healing and growth. Ultimately, Allah wants believers to feel better by knowing Him. Knowledge of Allah's names, attributes, and promises transforms fear into trust and confusion into clarity. When the believer understands that Allah is wise, gentle, patient, and loving, their heart softens and steadies. This knowledge becomes a source of comfort during trials and a foundation for resilience. The journey of faith is not linear, and feeling better does not mean the absence of struggle. It means the presence of meaning, support, and hope. Allah walks with His servants through hardship, not by removing every obstacle, but by strengthening the heart to endure. This divine companionship is the greatest comfort a believer can experience. Allah continues to nurture the believer's heart. B. Why teaching emotional intelligence rooted in faith? Islam does not encourage emotional chaos, nor does it promote emotional suppression. It teaches balance, awareness, and regulation through remembrance, reflection, and trust. When emotions rise, the believer is guided to pause, remember Allah, and respond with wisdom rather than impulse. This guidance protects the heart from being consumed by anger, despair, envy, or fear. Allah wants believers to feel better by freeing them from emotional slavery to circumstances and reactions. He teaches them to master their inner world through connection with Him. One of the most powerful ways Allah heals the heart is through dua. Supplication in Islam is not performance or poetic speech, it is raw honesty. Allah invites the believer to speak freely, to express pain, confusion, gratitude, and hope. Dua is an act of vulnerability and strength at the same time. When a believer raises their hands, they acknowledge their limits and Allah's power. This acknowledgement alone brings relief because it removes the illusion of control that burdens the soul. Allah promises to respond to those who call upon Him, and even when the response is delayed or altered, the act of calling itself heals the heart. Allah also wants believers to feel better by teaching them to let go of comparison. Modern life, especially in American culture, encourages constant comparison through social media, career competition, and lifestyle standards. This comparison breeds dissatisfaction, insecurity, and anxiety. Islam dismantles this by reminding the believer that Allah distributes blessings with wisdom and that every soul has its own test and provision. What appears as success to one may be a test, and what appears as hardship to another may be mercy. This understanding liberates the believer from envy and restores contentment. The Quran also addresses trauma and long-term pain by reminding believers that Allah is Al-Jabbar, the one who restores what is broken. No wound is too deep for Allah to heal. Emotional scars, memories, and losses are known to Him in detail. Healing in Islam is not always instant, but it is always possible. Allah replaces what is lost with something better, sometimes in ways unseen. This promise gives hope to those who feel permanently damaged or beyond repair. Allah specializes in restoration. Another way Allah brings relief is through purpose. Islam gives meaning to existence beyond survival and pleasure. When a believer understands that they are here to worship Allah, serve humanity, and grow spiritually, life gains direction. Purpose reduces anxiety because the believer knows why they endure hardship and where they are headed. Even mundane tasks become acts of worship when done with intention. This sense of purpose stabilizes the heart and brings satisfaction even in difficult circumstances. Allah also teaches believers to forgive themselves. Many people are trapped by regret, shame, and self-blame. Islam acknowledges mistakes but does not allow the believer to live imprisoned by them. Allah calls Himself Al-Ghafur and Afu, the one who forgives repeatedly and erases sins completely. When Allah forgives, He does not revisit the past. This divine forgiveness teaches believers to release self-condemnation and move forward. Feeling better begins when the believer accepts Allah's forgiveness and stops punishing themselves for what Allah has already forgiven. In moments of exhaustion, Allah offers rest through remembrance. Dhikr is not merely repetition of words, it is anchoring the heart in divine presence. Simple phrases carry immense weight because they remind the believer of truth. Saying Alhamdulillah cultivates gratitude, Subhanallah brings perspective, and Allahu Akbar reminds the heart that nothing is greater than Allah. These words realign the soul and provide calm during stress. Allah designed remembrance as accessible healing available at any moment. Allah also cares about the believer's physical well-being. Islam emphasi. Balance, moderation, and self-care. The Prophet encouraged rest, nourishment, cleanliness, and balance between worship and daily life. Burnout is not righteousness. Allah does not demand constant exertion without rest. He created the human being with needs, and honoring those needs is part of worship. Taking care of oneself is not selfish, it is obedience. Allah wants believers to feel better by living sustainably. Community worship also plays a role in emotional healing. Standing shoulder to shoulder in prayer reminds believers that they are not alone. Shared faith creates solidarity and belonging. The mosque is meant to be a place of refuge, compassion, and support. Allah wants believers to feel better together, not in isolation. Collective worship strengthens individual resilience. Allah also prepares believers for moments when relief does not come in the form they expect. Sometimes healing is gradual, sometimes hidden, and sometimes delayed until the hereafter. This does not negate Allah's care. It affirms His wisdom. Trusting Allah's plan even when outcomes are unclear is an act of deep faith. This trust brings peace because it releases the believer from constant anxiety about results. The believer's journey is marked by growth, not perfection. Allah celebrates effort, sincerity, and perseverance. Each step toward Him is valued. Even stumbling forward is progress. Allah does not measure success by speed, but by direction. Knowing this removes pressure and fosters patience. Ultimately, Allah wants believers to feel better by knowing that they matter, that they are seen, and that their lives have eternal significance. This knowledge transforms suffering into strength and uncertainty into trust. The believer who internalizes this truth walks through life with quiet confidence, grounded hope, and enduring peace. Allah continues to strengthen the believer by reshaping how they understand control. Much of human anxiety is rooted in the illusion that happiness depends on controlling outcomes, people, and circumstances. Islam gently removes this burden by teaching tawakkul, complete reliance upon Allah. Tawakkul is not passivity, it is effort paired with surrender. The believer strives with excellence while trusting Allah with results. This balance frees the heart from constant worry because the believer knows that what is meant for them will never miss them and what is not meant for them will never reach them. This certainty brings deep calm and emotional steadiness. Allah also heals the heart by teaching acceptance. Acceptance in Islam is not resignation, it is recognition of divine wisdom. When a believer accepts what Allah has decreed, their energy shifts from resistance to growth. Resistance prolongs pain, while acceptance transforms it. Allah promises reward for those who accept His decree with patience and trust. This acceptance allows the believer to move forward without bitterness and to find peace even in circumstances that cannot be changed. The Qur'an emphasizes remembrance of death, not to instill fear, but to bring clarity. Remembering mortality refocuses priorities and softens attachment to temporary disappointments. When the believer remembers that life is fleeting, worldly problems lose their power to dominate the heart. This perspective brings relief because it reminds the believer that every hardship has an endpoint and every injustice will be addressed. Allah's justice is complete and nothing escapes it. Allah also wants believers to feel better by cultivating humility. Arrogance isolates the heart while humility connects it to Allah and to people. Humility allows the believer to seek help, admit weakness, and grow. Allah loves humility because it reflects truth, the truth that humans are dependent on Allah is sufficient. This humility brings peace because it removes the pressure to appear strong or flawless. Islam also addresses fear of the future by teaching hope. Hope in Islam is not wishful thinking, it is confidence in Allah's promises. Allah promises guidance, provision, forgiveness, and ultimate success for those who believe. This hope anchors the believer during uncertainty. Even when paths are unclear, hope keeps the heart moving forward with trust. Allah nurtures resilience by reminding believers of their identity. The believer is not defined by trauma, failure, or loss. They are defined by their relationship with Allah. This identity is stable and unshakable. When a believer remembers who they are, their self-worth is restored and emotional wounds begin to heal. The Prophet modeled emotional strength through compassion, patience, and faith. He faced rejection without bitterness, loss without despair, and hardship without resentment. His example shows that feeling better does not require escaping pain, but transforming one's relationship with it. Following his example brings emotional maturity and spiritual strength. Allah also teaches believers to find beauty in simplicity. Contentment is a powerful source of peace. When the heart is content, it rests. Islam encourages moderation, gratitude, and mindfulness. This counters the constant dissatisfaction promoted by consumer culture. Contentment allows joy to exist without excess. Allah reassures believers that they are never alone in their struggle. Angels record their patience, prayers, and tears. Nothing is wasted. This awareness gives dignity to suffering. Knowing that Allah witnesses every effort brings comfort and motivation. Faith also teaches believers to speak kindly to themselves. Negative self-talk corrodes peace. The Qur'an replaces harsh inner dialogue with reminders of mercy, forgiveness, and worth. Allah addresses believers with honor and respect, teaching them to do the same for themselves. In moments of weakness, Allah's door remains open. There is no expiration on mercy. The believer can return at any time. This accessibility prevents despair and encourages perseverance. Ultimately, Allah wants believers to feel better by living in alignment with truth.
We begin by praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and bearing witness that none has the right to be worshipped or unconditionally obeyed except for Him, and we bear witness that
Muhammad may still face storms, but their heart remains anchored. This anchoring is the greatest gift Allah gives His servants, and it is the source of lasting well-being, strength, and serenity. Allah continues to guide the believer toward emotional and spiritual well-being by teaching them to reframe loss. In Islam is not meaningless subtraction, it is transformation. When something is taken away, Allah does not leave emptiness without purpose. He replaces attachment with awareness and dependence with trust. The believer learns that what truly belongs to Allah cannot be lost, and what is taken was never owned absolutely. This realization softens grief and allows healing to begin without erasing love or memory. Allah also wants believers to feel better by teaching them restraint of the tongue and heart. Much inner turmoil comes from words spoken in anger, regret, or despair. Islam emphasizes mindful speech and silent reflection. When the believer learns to pause before reacting, their emotional world becomes calmer and more controlled. Silence and remembrance is often more healing than endless expression. Allah honors those who restrain themselves and rewards them with inner peace. The Qur'an also addresses disappointment with people. Humans will fail, betray, misunderstand, and disappoint. Islam prepares the believer for this reality without making them cynical. Allah teaches that ultimate reliance must be placed in Him, not in people. When the believer shifts expectations from creation to creator, disappointment loses its destructive power. Relationships become healthier because they are built on compassion, not unrealistic demands. Allah nurtures emotional healing by reminding believers of His nearness during hardship. He tells them that He is with those who are patient and mindful. This companionship is not symbolic, it is real, sustaining, and protective. Owing that Allah is present during pain transforms isolation into connection. Even when no one else understands, Allah understands completely. Faith also teaches the believer to honor their emotions without being ruled by them. Emotions are signals, not authorities. Islam validates feelings but guides behavior through principle. This balance allows the believer to process pain without acting destructively. Emotional regulation rooted in faith produces maturity and strength. Allah also wants believers to feel better by encouraging service to others. Helping others shifts focus outward and activates compassion. Service is healing because it reminds the believer of their ability to contribute meaningfully despite personal struggles. The Prophet taught that the most beloved people to Allah are those who benefit others. This service brings joy, purpose, and connection. Another source of relief is trust in divine justice. Many suffer from unanswered wrongs and unresolved injustices. Allah reassures believers that nothing is forgotten and no wrong will remain unaddressed. This certainty allows the believer to release obsession with revenge and rest in Allah's justice. Letting go of bitterness lightens the heart. Allah also teaches believers to live in the present moment. Anxiety often comes from reliving the past or fearing the future. Islam grounds the believer in now through prayer, remembrance, and mindfulness of Allah. This presence reduces mental overload and increases peace. The Qur'an speaks gently to exhausted hearts. Allah knows fatigue and honors effort. He does not expect constant strength. He allows rest, recovery, and renewal. Even worship has concessions for hardship. This mercy prevents burnout and preserves faith. Allah's mercy is also reflected in His patience. He does not rush His servants. Growth takes time, healing takes time, and Allah allows that time. Knowing this reduces pressure and self-criticism. In moments when faith feels heavy, Allah invites simplicity. A single sincere act can outweigh many struggles. Consistency matters more than quantity. This approach makes faith sustainable and comforting. The believer's journey toward feeling better is gradual, layered, and lifelong. Allah walks with His servants step by step. Each stage brings new understanding and deeper peace. The heart that trusts Allah becomes resilient, flexible, and calm. In the end, Allah wants believers to feel better, not because life becomes easy, but because the heart becomes secure. Security in Allah is the greatest comfort. It carries the believer through uncertainty, loss, and change with grace and strength. This is the gift of faith and the mercy of Allah that never ends. Allah continues to uplift the believer by teaching them to detach from outcomes while remaining committed to values. Much emotional pain comes from tying self-worth to results, approval, or recognition. Islam redirects the believer to sincerity. When actions are done for Allah alone, the heart is protected from disappointment because Allah never overlooks effort. This sincerity purifies intention and brings relief because the believer no longer lives for applause or validation. Living for Allah creates freedom. Allah also wants believers to feel better by teaching them discipline with compassion. Structure in worship routine and ethics creates stability. Chaos breeds anxiety while consistency nurtures peace. Islam provides a rhythm for life that balances work, rest, worship, and relationships. This rhythm grounds the believer and provides predictability in an unpredictable world. The Quran also prepares believers for moments of spiritual dryness. Feeling distant does not mean faith is lost. Allah understands fluctuation and does not withdraw mercy during low moments. He encourages perseverance through small acts and continued remembrance. This reassurance prevents despair and keeps the believer connected. Allah nurtures emotional healing through reflection, contemplating nature. Life and divine signs restores perspective. The Quran invites believers to look at the sky, the earth, and creation as reminders of Allah's power and care. This reflection expands the heart and reduces fixation on personal worries. Allah also emphasizes honesty with oneself. Self-deception prolongs pain while honesty initiates healing. Islam encourages self-accountability without harshness. Recognizing flaws becomes an opportunity for growth, not shame. Allah supports those who seek improvement sincerely. Another source of comfort is knowing that Allah answers prayers in multiple ways. Sometimes He gives what is asked, sometimes He delays, sometimes He replaces it with something better. Trusting this wisdom alleviates frustration and strengthens patience. The believer learns that unanswered prayers are not ignored prayers. Allah also teaches believers to cultivate gentleness. Harshness toward oneself and others hardens the heart. Gentleness brings softness and peace. The Prophet emphasized gentleness in all matters and described it as beautifying everything it touches. Practicing gentleness heals relationships and inner turmoil. The Quran reminds believers that guidance is a gift. Being guided itself is mercy. This awareness fosters gratitude and humility. Recognizing guidance as blessing brings reassurance and confidence. Allah also wants believers to feel better by reminding them of their eternal reward. Every act of patience, restraint, kindness, and faith is recorded. This assurance gives strength during hardship. The believer knows their struggle has purpose beyond the present. Faith also teaches resilience through optimism. Expecting good from Allah nurtures hope. Allah says He is as His servant expects Him to be. Positive expectation grounded in trust shapes emotional outlook and encourages perseverance. Allah's compassion extends to moments of failure. Falling does not define the believer, returning does. Allah celebrates repentance and welcomes those who turn back repeatedly. This mercy removes fear of trying again. Ultimately, Allah wants believers to feel better by living with awareness of His presence. This awareness transforms fear into trust, loneliness into companionship, and pain into growth. The believer who lives with Allah in their heart finds peace even when life is heavy. This journey is ongoing, and Allah's mercy remains constant. The heart that relies on Allah is never abandoned, never unseen, and never without hope. Allah continues to carry the believer forward by teaching them endurance without hardness. Endurance in Islam is not emotional shutdown, it is strength with softness. The believer learns to stand firm while keeping the heart alive, compassionate, and open. This balance prevents bitterness and preserves humanity even in prolonged trials. Allah loves those who endure with grace, and He rewards hearts that remain gentle despite hardship. Allah also wants believers to feel better by removing the fear of being forgotten. Many people fear that their struggles are invisible and their sacrifices unnoticed. Islam removes this fear completely. Allah is Ash-Shahid, the ever-witnessing. Every silent act of patience, every private tear, every restrained reaction is known and recorded. This awareness gives dignity to suffering and transforms loneliness into purpose. The Quran teaches believers to see life as a series of chapters, not a single moment. Painful chapters do not define the entire story. Allah controls the narrative, and He is the best of planners. When the believer trusts this, they stop interpreting temporary pain as permanent reality. This perspective restores hope and emotional balance. Allah also heals by teaching believers to release perfectionism. The pursuit of flawlessness exhausts the soul. Islam replaces perfection with sincerity. Allah does not demand sinlessness. He asks for repentance, effort, and humility. This removes crushing pressure and allows the believer to grow at a human pace. Growth becomes sustainable, and faith becomes nurturing rather than burdensome. Allah wants believers to feel better by strengthening their moral courage. Standing for truth, integrity, and justice brings inner peace even when it comes with sacrifice. Compromising values may bring temporary comfort but lasting unrest. Allah promises tranquility to those who remain upright. This moral alignment stabilizes the heart. The Prophet taught that real richness is richness of the soul. Islam shifts the definition of success from accumulation to contentment. When the believer internalizes this wealth, anxiety decreases and gratitude increases. A content heart is resilient and calm regardless of external conditions. Allah also encourages believers to practice patience with themselves. Healing is not linear and faith fluctuates. Allah does not rush His servants, and neither should they rush themselves. Allowing time for growth prevents despair and builds confidence. Another source of comfort is knowing that Allah chooses His servants carefully for tests. Trials are not random punishments, they are tailored experiences meant to refine, elevate, and draw the believer closer. Allah tests those He loves to strengthen their connection with Him. This understanding changes how hardship is perceived. Allah wants believers to feel better by teaching them to speak to Him frequently. Constant remembrance creates intimacy. The more the believer speaks to Allah, the lighter the heart becomes. Conversation with Allah replaces rumination and worry. Islam also restores peace by teaching moderation. Excess in any form destabilizes the heart. Balance in work, worship, rest, and relationships creates harmony. Allah loves moderation because it sustains faith and well-being. The Qur'an reminds believers that relief often comes after persistence, not immediately. Waiting with trust builds resilience. Allah rewards those who wait with patience and hope. Allah also teaches believers to appreciate small mercies. Small blessings accumulate into profound gratitude. This awareness shifts focus from lack to abundance and nurtures joy. Ultimately, Allah wants believers to feel better by making Him the center of their lives. When Allah is central, everything else finds its proper place. Worries shrink, priorities clarify, and peace settles. This is not escape from reality, it is alignment with truth. The believer who lives with Allah at the center carries light within even during darkness. This light guides, comforts, and strengthens. Allah does not promise a life without pain. He promises a heart that can endure it with faith, dignity, and peace. Allah continues to expand the believer's heart by teaching them trust that is deeper than understanding. Not everything that happens will make sense immediately, and Islam does not require the believer to understand everything to find peace. Allah asks for trust because His knowledge surrounds what the human mind cannot grasp. When the believer accepts that some wisdom will only be revealed later or not at all, the heart relaxes. This release from the need to understand everything immediately is a major source of emotional relief. The believer learns to say with certainty that Allah knows while they submit, and this submission is not weakness, it is clarity. Allah also wants believers to feel better by reshaping their relationship with time. Regret ties the heart to the past, and anxiety chains it to the future. Islam brings the heart back to the present moment with Allah. Every breath is an opportunity for remembrance, every moment a chance for reward. When the believer lives consciously with Allah, now the weight of yesterday and tomorrow lightens. This presence becomes grounding and calming. The Qur'an reminds believers that Allah's mercy precedes His anger. This principle transforms how believers see themselves and their Lord. Instead of expecting punishment, they expect mercy, correction, and guidance. This expectation nurtures hope and emotional safety. A believer who feels safe with Allah does not live in constant fear. Safety with Allah produces courage, honesty, and inner calm. Allah also wants believers to feel better by teaching them to accept help. Independence is praised in many cultures, but Islam values interdependence. Accepting help does not reduce dignity, it reflects humility. Allah sends support through people, opportunities, and moments. Recognizing these signs and accepting them strengthens faith and emotional well-being. Allah heals hearts by reminding believers of their worth. Humans are honored creations entrusted with responsibility and dignity. Allah created humanity with purpose and intention. This honor exists regardless of success or failure. When the believer internalizes this inherent worth, self-esteem stabilizes and shame loses power. Islam also teaches believers to replace complaint with conversation with Allah. Expressing pain to Allah is an act of faith. Complaining about Allah distances the heart, but speaking to Allah draws it closer. This shift transforms suffering into connection. Allah welcomes honest expression and responds with mercy. Allah encourages believers to cultivate gratitude during hardship, not as denial, but as perspective. Even in difficulty, there are layers of mercy, protection, and growth. Gratitude reveals these layers and softens pain. A grateful heart is resilient because it can hold joy alongside sorrow. Allah also wants believers to feel better by strengthening their conscience. A clear conscience brings peace. Living ethically aligned with divine guidance reduces internal conflict. When actions reflect values, the heart rests. This alignment is deeply soothing and stabilizing. The Quran reminds believers that they are part of something greater than themselves. Being connected to a divine story, purpose, and community gives meaning to personal struggles, meaning transforms pain into contribution. Knowing that one's endurance benefits the soul and others brings fulfillment, Allah also teaches believers to protect their hearts from constant negativity. Guarding what one consumes emotionally, mentally, and spiritually is essential. Islam encourages moderation in exposure and intentionality in choices. Protecting the heart preserves peace. Allah nurtures patience by reminding believers that growth happens in difficulty. Comfort rarely produces transformation. Trials refine character, deepen faith, and strengthen reliance on Allah. Recognizing this reframes hardship as opportunity. Allah wants believers to feel better by reminding them that change is possible. Hearts can soften. Habits can break, wounds can heal. Nothing is fixed permanently except Allah. This belief fuels hope and persistence. Allah also teaches believers to celebrate progress, not perfection. Each step toward Allah matters. Small, consistent acts build lasting strength. This encouragement sustains motivation. The believer's emotional journey becomes lighter when anchored in Allah's promises. Promises of forgiveness, guidance, provision, and eternal peace form a safety net beneath life's uncertainties. Allah's mercy flows continuously even when unnoticed. Becoming aware of this mercy changes perception. Life becomes less hostile and more meaningful. In the end, Allah wants believers to feel better by living with Him at the center, trusting His wisdom, accepting His decree, and relying on His mercy. This way of living does not eliminate pain, but it transforms it into strength, hope, and closeness. The heart that knows Allah is never empty, never lost, and never without comfort. Allah continues to deepen the believer's sense of peace by teaching them that faith is not an escape from reality, but a way to stand firmly within it. Islam does not numb the believer to pain, nor does it deny hardship. It equips the heart with strength, clarity, and meaning so that reality can be faced without collapse. This strength comes from knowing that Allah is in control even when circumstances feel chaotic. When the believer internalizes this truth, panic subsides and resilience grows. The heart learns to breathe again. Allah also wants believers to feel better by teaching them that their value is not diminished by struggle. In fact, struggle often elevates a believer's rank. The Quran affirms that Allah raises people through patience, sincerity, and endurance. Pain does not lower worth, it often refines it. This understanding heals the wound of self-blame that many carry when life becomes difficult. The believer no longer asks what is wrong with them, but understands that growth often requires pressure. Allah teaches believers to anchor joy in meaning rather than pleasure. Pleasure is fleeting and unstable, while meaning sustains the soul. Acts of worship, kindness, service, and moral courage produce a quiet, enduring joy. This joy remains even when pleasure fades. Allah wants believers to feel better through this deeper form of happiness that is rooted in purpose rather than circumstance. Islam also guides believers to manage expectations. Unrealistic expectations of people, life, or oneself breed disappointment. Allah teaches moderation, realism, and trust. When expectations are aligned with divine wisdom, disappointment loses its sting, relationships improve, and inner peace grows. Allah wants believers to feel better by reminding them that vulnerability is not failure. Being vulnerable with Allah opens the door to healing. The Qur'an speaks to hearts in pain, not with condemnation, but with reassurance. Allah listens attentively and responds with care. This divine responsiveness nurtures emotional security. Allah also teaches believers to invest in what lasts. Chasing temporary validation exhausts the soul. Investing in faith, character, and service builds lasting fulfillment. The believer learns to prioritize what nourishes the heart rather than what distracts it. The Quran repeatedly reminds believers that Allah's plan is precise. Nothing happens without purpose. Even delays serve wisdom. This knowledge reduces frustration and cultivates patience. The believer learns to wait without despair. Allah wants believers to feel better by teaching them compassion toward others. Compassion softens the heart and reduces inner conflict. The more compassionate the believer becomes, the lighter the heart feels. Compassion aligns the believer with Allah's mercy. Allah also reminds believers that suffering connects them to humanity. Pain fosters empathy and understanding. Through suffering, believers become more capable of supporting others. This connection transforms isolation into solidarity. Allah teaches believers to release control over what they cannot change and focus on what they can. This distinction prevents exhaustion. Effort becomes intentional and trust fills the gaps. Allah wants believers to feel better by teaching them to see themselves as travelers, not permanent residents of this world. This perspective reduces attachment to temporary setbacks and comforts the heart. Allah also reassures believers that their prayers are heard even when unanswered in expected ways. Every prayer shapes the believer even if circumstances remain unchanged. Prayer itself is healing. Allah nurtures peace by teaching believers to remember Him frequently. Constant remembrance creates inner companionship. The believer never feels truly alone. Allah also teaches believers to cultivate hope intentionally. Hope is an act of worship. Expecting good from Allah honors His mercy. This expectation shapes emotional resilience. Allah wants believers to feel better by teaching them that setbacks do not erase progress. Faith grows through cycles. Returning matters more than falling. Allah also emphasizes gratitude for guidance. Being guided is a blessing beyond measure. This awareness brings humility and peace. Allah's mercy accompanies believers through every phase. Awareness of this mercy transforms fear into trust, the believer who lives with. This awareness moves through life with steadiness. Challenges remain, but the heart is fortified. Allah does not promise a painless life, He promises a supported one. This support is constant, intimate, and sufficient. The heart that trusts Allah rests even while moving. This rest is the essence of feeling better. Allah continues to guide, comfort, and uplift His servants until they meet Him. This journey of healing is lifelong, and Allah never abandons those who turn to Him. Allah continues to open the believer's inner vision by teaching them that peace is not something to be chased, but something to be returned to. The human soul was created in a state of fitra, a natural alignment with Allah, and every form of restlessness is a signal of distance from that center. Islam does not tell the believer to manufacture peace, it tells them to return to where peace already exists. When the heart turns back to Allah, it is not discovering something new, it is remembering something ancient and familiar. This remembrance is deeply healing because it reconnects the soul to its origin. Allah also wants believers to feel better by teaching them that they are allowed to slow down. The modern world glorifies speed, urgency, and constant motion, but the soul was not created to live in perpetual rush. Islam introduces intentional pauses through prayer, reflection, fasting, and remembrance. These pauses are not interruptions, they are mercy. They give the believer space to breathe, recalibrate, and reconnect. When the believer honors these pauses, anxiety loosens its grip and the heart regains balance. Allah nurtures emotional strength by teaching believers to accept uncertainty without panic. Much distress comes from the fear of the unknown. Islam acknowledges uncertainty as part of the human experience and counters it with trust in Allah's knowledge. When the believer accepts that not knowing everything is natural and that Allah knows all things, fear softens. Uncertainty becomes tolerable and even meaningful because it invites reliance rather than control. Allah also wants believers to feel better by reminding them that hardship does not invalidate their prayers. Many people believe that unanswered prayers mean rejection. Islam corrects this misunderstanding. Allah hears every prayer and responds with wisdom. Sometimes the response is immediate, sometimes delayed, sometimes transformed into protection or reward. This understanding prevents despair and keeps the believer connected to Allah even during prolonged difficulty. Allah heals the heart by teaching believers to reinterpret silence. Silence from Allah is not absence, it is often preparation. Growth happens in silence. Roots deepen before branches rise. When the believer understands this, silence becomes less frightening and more sacred. Trust replaces fear and patience replaces frustration. Allah also emphasizes that emotional pain does not disqualify one from closeness to Him. Pain can be a doorway to deeper intimacy. The Qur'an addresses hearts in distress with tenderness, not condemnation. Allah draws closer to those who are broken because brokenness invites humility and sincerity. This closeness is a source of comfort that cannot be replicated by anything else. Allah wants believers to feel better by teaching them that healing is layered. Some wounds heal quickly, others take time. Islam allows space for gradual recovery. Allah does not rush the process, nor does He measure worth by speed. Each stage of healing carries reward. This patience removes pressure and nurtures self-compassion. Allah also guides believers to cultivate emotional honesty without self-indulgence. Acknowledging pain while maintaining responsibility is a sign of maturity. Islam supports this balance by encouraging reflection, accountability, and hope. This prevents emotional stagnation and promotes growth. Allah teaches believers to ground themselves in gratitude for simple, consistent blessings. Breath, sight, guidance, safety, and moments of clarity are all gifts. Recognizing these gifts shifts focus from scarcity to abundance. Gratitude stabilizes emotions and strengthens resilience. Allah also wants believers to feel better by reminding them that faith is a relationship, not a transaction. Allah is not waiting to punish mistakes. He invites return, growth, and dialogue. This relational understanding fosters trust and reduces fear. The believer feels safe approaching Allah with honesty. Allah nurtures peace by teaching believers to limit what enters the heart. Constant exposure to negativity, conflict, and distraction unsettles the soul. Islam encourages intentionality in what one consumes mentally and spiritually. Protecting the heart preserves tranquility. Allah also emphasizes mercy toward oneself. Self-criticism often masquerades as piety, but it erodes peace. Islam replaces harshness with accountability balanced by hope. Allah's mercy sets the standard for how believers treat themselves. Allah wants believers to feel better by strengthening their identity as servants of Allah. This identity transcends roles, achievements, and failures. It provides stability in a changing world. When the believer knows who they are, their heart steadies. Allah also teaches believers that sadness does not negate faith. The prophets experienced sorrow yet remained beloved. This validation allows believers to feel without guilt. Emotions are part of the human experience and Allah meets believers within them. Allah nurtures hope by reminding believers that every difficulty has an expiration. Nothing lasts forever except Allah. This impermanence of hardship brings relief. Knowing that pain will end allows endurance. Allah also teaches believers to invest in the unseen. Actions done for Allah accumulate reward even when results are not visible. This unseen investment brings long-term peace. Allah wants believers to feel better by teaching them to trust His character. He's just merciful, wise, and gentle. Trusting who Allah is stabilizes the heart. When life is confusing, Allah continues to walk with His servants through every season. His mercy does not fluctuate with circumstances. Awareness of this constancy anchors the soul, the believer who internalizes these truths does not escape pain, but navigates it with dignity. Their heart becomes resilient, flexible, and hopeful. Allah becomes their refuge not only in crisis, but in everyday life. This refuge is the ultimate comfort. It is not loud or dramatic, but steady and sustaining. Allah wants believers to feel better by living in this refuge, by returning to Him again and again without fear. This journey of healing does not end in this life. It continues until the believer meets Allah with a heart that has learned to trust, love, and rest. Allah's promise is true. His mercy is vast and His care never ends.